Welcome to Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theater. Now, here's your host, Lisa Condit.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, I am in the studio with two very impressive men. We've got Don Phipps, who's our curator for the Mighty Wurlitzer, and also Clark Wilson, who we've had on the program before, and he is a nationally acclaimed organist, and he does the live accompaniments for our silent film series. Clark and Don happen to be in the area today, and they're doing all sorts of work, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
My pleasure also.
So, Don, I'm going to start with you because we've talked for a long time. I've known you since before the theater opened. You are the person that has brought us the Mighty Wurlitzer. You put together your amazing team. You help to maintain and repair and do everything. You're our resident expert. So what's going on with the Mighty Wurlitzer these days?
Well, we're very fortunate to have Clark Wilson and Carlton Smith, who are two nationally acclaimed theater organ technicians and architects, to bring the organ on which we've been working for over 5 years to its final state of tonal finishing. Oh. It's sort of the end of a long process and a long dream. And we're finally seeing the end.
Can you take us through a little bit what you mean by that? Because people who might not be familiar with an organ don't realize that there are a whole series of tunings.
Well, of course, a lot of people think that what they see in the orchestra pit of the Hanover is the whole instrument, but actually that's just a small percentage, or as we like to say, the tip of the iceberg. In two chambers up towards the ceiling of the auditorium are two large organ chambers that, among other things, contain approximately 2,450 pipes. To bring the organ to its final stage of regulation, Clark Wilson and Carlton Smith will tonally adjust every one of those pipes for proper volume, proper tone, proper pitch.
Wow. So Clark, tell us a little bit about that process, if you don't mind.
Well, the process takes two people, one to do the listening down below at the console out in the auditorium, and the other to actually physically work on the pipes. And so we'll go through a set like a clarinet or an oboe or a flute or a tuba or a violin, and we'll adjust each of the pipes to make sure that they sort of come in with their neighbors, so to speak. So they all sound quite similar, like they're all part of a set. And then we also adjust volume and speech character, how quickly they speak, and so on, so they all interact with each other. This organ has many, many different sets of pipes, and everything has to work together to create the right ensemble.
Oh, absolutely. But I have a question, because I'm familiar enough with instruments to understand how complicated tunings can really be. So when you're saying one is listening and one is making the adjustments, physically, how does that work with making the adjustments? Are there special tools that you're using? Is it a lever that you're, what is it?
There are special tools that we do use, and quite often what we're doing is loudening a pipe or softening a pipe to fit in with its neighbors, and it's literally a process of giving that pipe more wind, more air, because the organ works on a compressed air type system. So it's like blowing on a whistle. The harder you blow on the whistle, the louder the whistle gets. So we adjust things that way, and we adjust lengths of the pipes and so on, which is part of a tuning process as well, but also that loud, soft adjustment to get everything to fit in. And many of these pipes have what we call a mouth area, just like a whistle where the air comes out and creates the sound, and those have to be adjusted exactly right. Or the pipe will make a funny sound when it speaks, or it'll be very slow to speak, or it just won't sound correct. It won't sound like its neighbors. And so with all of these different things that we have to work with, we can adjust each of those in so they really are very, very close. Two different kinds of pipes, what we call a flute pipe, which is like a whistle, and the other is a reed pipe, which is like a common clarinet with a vibrating reed. And that's a whole different process, what we use in those then, of curving the reeds, which are made of brass, and adjusting them so they speak correctly as well. And then, of course, bringing the whole thing in, and the final step is tuning all of it so it's all dead in tune, and then you've got a finished organ.
Okay, so I've been to the organ Are they called organ lofts? Okay, so I've been to both of those organ lofts, and boy, it's beautiful. And there are so many artistic pictures you can take with the pipes all lined up, and you get those great infinity shots. And so I can visualize what you're talking about with the mouth of the pipe. But what I don't know is, I remember seeing the picture where you had that beautiful bow on every single pipe all lined up. But how do you adjust the opening? You're not filing anything. Is it a piece of special fabric that you're using?
No, you're not physically altering these pipes or taking the saw to them or anything like that.
I wouldn't think so.
But no. But as I say, you're opening up what we'll call a toe hole, where the wind comes into the pipe. You want that opening to be a little bit larger, so you'll use a particular tool to maybe open that up, let more wind in, make the pipe louder. The tuning process is lengthening or shortening the tops of the pipes. They usually have a collar on them, or a little metal scroll that rolls back and forth, things like that. The reeds are adjusted by like a spring wire that pushes against them, and that raises and lowers as well, and lets more of or less of that reed come into action. The longer the reed is, the lower the pitch goes.
Right.
The shorter the reed is, the higher the pitch goes. So this is what we're doing, is doing these adjustments, but it's not adding anything to the pipes or taking anything away. It's just a little bit of a manipulation, and usually in increments that you cannot see.
I'm sure. So what are these tools called? And listen, I'm picturing 2,400 different pipes, all of different sizes, dimensions. Like you said, there are different types of pipes, whether it's a reed or the brass opening, and so you're adjusting the opening a little bit. And I'm in my mind, this is what I'm picturing, because I've never seen it. I'm picturing what you would use to almost open a paint can, to move that a little bit. It has got to be more technical than that.
Well, the tools usually that organ builders use quite often are things that they've made themselves. There are some things that you get at the hardware store, like a common awl, a scratch awl, or an ice pick. Something like that fit in these little tiny toe holes and open them up. You use a particular tiny little hammer for certain things, and there's what we call a burnisher, which is just something that we use to curve reed tongues. It's just to press against the reed tongues and to what we call burnish a curve into that to allow it to speak properly. It's an interesting array of pointy things for the most part, and little rods and things you can reach into the pipes with, and so on. But nothing spectacular and nothing large.
Well,
now, in the Wurlitzer organ, there's some very, very high pressure pipe work on some pipes that are almost 20 feet tall and about as big around as a trash barrel, made of lumber. They're called diaphone pipes. And to work on those, you use wrenches. That's more like working on a steam engine than it is working on organ pipes.
Oh, yeah.
Unique to the theater organ, but it's something that creates a particular character of these Wurlitzer organs, and also something that we need to work with.
Well, it's interesting because Clark you're not from this area. You travel all over the country doing this.
Right, all over North America.
So you need to bring these tools with you. So
we do, although we're lucky in a case like this, where someone like Don, who has spent his life working with these organs, has quite a good deal of what we need. But the two of us also bring our little odds and ends along, and it's like anything else. Particular workmen have favorite tools that they like to use.
So I suspect the two of you met long ago. How long ago, Don, did you and Clark meet each other?
Well, I've been aware of Clark's reputation for probably 30 years, and it's been my privilege to work with him on several projects that involve organs in this area. So our working relationship has probably been in the last 10 years, but I'm well aware of his reputation many years before that.
So do you remember when you first reached out to him about the Hanover Theater organ?
Absolutely. We were far from even starting the installation of the instrument, and I talked to Clark, and I told Clark that I valued his expertise to such an extent that if he would be the architect of the overall design of the organ, I would guarantee that his services would be engaged to do the tonal finishing, and that's what we're working on now.
And we're almost 6 years later. It's that much time. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about more specific upcoming events with both Clark and Don after this quick break. Stay tuned.
Now, back to more of Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theater and your host, Lisa Condit.
Welcome back, everyone. During the break, Clark and I were just talking about, okay, so explain the tuning to me a little bit more. And as Don and Clark were explaining, really they're in the final finishing touches and tonal adjustments. So much more has been done before we've even gotten to this point. And I'd love for people to get some perspective on that. Do you mind taking us through that, Clark?
Well, there's so much that goes into one of the instruments. I mean, there's years worth of installation work that they have done just to get the thing to play to begin with. So when you press a key, everything happens that's supposed to. Again, when we come in, we've got all of this work to do on the individual pipes. We go through and we tune the organ to see what we've got. We adjust what we call wind systems, vibratos, tremulants on the organ, so it shakes and vibrates just correctly, you know, like the vibrato in a violin or an orchestra or whatever. And then we have the basic sound, and then we begin to work on the individual pipes. And you've got many, many adjustments on a pipe. I mean, we work with these little toe holes like we were talking about, which is the part of the pipe that actually sits in the mechanism and receives the air. And then there's a piece called a languid, partway up the pipe, that we adjust up or down for the speed of the pipe. There's an upper lip. There's a lower lip. There's a windway. There are ears. There are beards. There are all these technical little pieces. And if they're off just by a gnat's whisker, it's enough to upset the speech of the pipe. Now, all of this has been carefully done, in this case by the Wurlitzer factory originally when the organ was built. That's called voicing. What we're doing is regulation. So we're doing restorative work, bringing all of these parts back to exactly where they're supposed to be, so each of the pipes speaks at its optimum level.
Wow.
Now, when everything is correct, a pipe sings. You're not forcing it to do too much. You're not quieting it down and not letting it give out with its full tone color. You're letting it sing. And really, what we're doing is just simply tapering and working those sounds in so they fit this room specifically. Because if you move an organ from one place to another, the sound changes completely.
Right.
Half the battle is the acoustics of the room and how it couples up with that theater.
And our mighty Wurlitzer, Don, I have a couple questions for you because you're the one that collected all the pieces and put them together for us. Do we have more than one organ's parts as part of our mighty Wurlitzer?
Yes. Actually, I would say there were about 20 organs that contributed parts. You see, back 40 years ago, when the theaters were being torn down, converted to parking lots, a lot of these instruments became available, sometimes on the side of the road or from the junk man. And since the Hanover's organ is one of the 20 largest organs that Wurlitzer built out of 2,200 instruments, since I did not have access to buy a large organ, what I did over several decades was to collect parts from smaller instruments, combine them together to make an instrument which is now the largest theater pipe organ in New England. In addition to this, certain parts that were not available because they were so rare or either not available due to cost or just plain not available, I had replicated and built to try and emulate the original specifications of the Wurlitzer pipes, and they were added to sort of round out the instrument into what Clark specified in his architectural requirements.
What a complete labor of love. And as you're both talking about it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so we have this beautiful, magnificent instrument that we have been enjoying for years now. And it sounds fabulous to me. And it's not that I don't know how to listen to music. I think it sounds fabulous. I can only imagine what it's going to sound like after you gentlemen are done with the final adjustments. As you're working with the Mighty Wurlitzer at the Hanover Theater, Clark, are there any observations or adjustments or any particular strengths or things you think that we need to watch out for as this instrument continues to become more comfortable in our venue and you make your adjustments?
Oh, I think the organ's very happy there now. This is one of these very lucky circumstances where the instrument couples up with the room and really creates an experience. Not every theater organ is that way. Not every auditorium is that way. Not every room receives bass well or treble well. Sometimes organs are muffled or have a particularly unpleasant ring. I think this organ sounds very, very good in this room. And, you know, one of the things that we judge by, which is way beyond what the average person listening to the instrument would understand, is a comparison factor somewhat. There were some large Wurlitzer organs that were very, very famous in this business. The New York Paramount organ, the San Francisco Fox organ, that just everybody has known about forever. And if you can get something that's anywhere close to the sound of one of those instruments, it's really special. And the Hanover has that sound.
We are so fortunate. So I just have to put in a little bit of a plug here because, as I said before, Don, you've been involved with the theater since before we opened. You've invested a lot of your personal time, treasure, and talent in this particular project. And we do have an organ fund. So if, as you're listening, you think to yourself, wow, that's a lot of work. That must be really expensive. You would be 100% correct. And I know that Don and everybody at the Hanover Theater would feel wonderful if we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that our instrument would be taken care of for the rest of the theater's life. And so Don has been working with Nell Lazor in our development department. She's our director of development, and they have established a Mighty Wurlitzer Fund. And you are able to donate to that fund through our website, which is thehanovertheater.org, and it's under the Support Us feature. Just go to the Mighty Wurlitzer Fund. I think it might also be a pop-up, by the way, when you purchase tickets. Just putting that out there as we're all listening to all of this hard work that's going on. Don, is there anything else that you wanted to add, or Clark, to the overall experience of putting the organ together and then bringing it to our venue and then finally seeing the end result? And is this really truly the end result, or will Clark be visiting us again with his tuning instruments in the near future?
Well, we're very happy to know that Clark will be visiting us and wearing his different hat as a world-renowned accompanist to silent pictures, as well as being a concert artist. So we trust that the next time he comes, he'll leave his toolkit at home and just bring his talent at playing the instrument, particularly in the accompaniment of silent pictures, with him.
That's great. How often, because I know a piano needs to be tuned regularly, how often does the Mighty Wurlitzer need to be tuned or adjusted?
Usually twice a year.
Twice a year?
Yes, in the fall and in the spring.
As the weather conditions change, or is that really just the timing of what's convenient?
Well, the organ is quite susceptible to changes in temperature and in humidity also.
Right. You know, one other thing that I just want to talk a little bit about is that people are always surprised that it's an electric console for the organ. You know, Clark mentioned, or maybe it was Don who mentioned, that a lot of times people think that the organ is what they see in the pit, but it is oh so much more. And we have these chambers and we have 2,400 pipes, and it's an electric console. When did that start? When did it become an electric console versus what you think of when you think of the older, more traditional, say, church organs?
Well, this is an organ building question in general. Originally, the organs were mechanical action. The keys were linked to the mechanism immediately underneath the pipes. And then they transferred off to what they called a tubular pneumatic system that used hoses that ran back and forth and conducted air. Then when they discovered electricity for organ building, which is just 12 volts DC, it's not 110 or 440 or anything like that, that revolutionized the entire organ industry. Church organs, theater organs. All theater organs, as we know them, have always been what we call these electro-pneumatic instruments. They've always had electricity involved in these little magnets and so on. And what linked the organ console that you see in the orchestra pit to the organ was simply a series of little tiny 12-volt wires. And that's where we're at today. The thing that has changed about this business is now, instead of a huge room full of electromechanical relays, like an old-fashioned telephone exchange, now that's all done in a computerized fashion. So you've got a computer in the back of the console, et cetera, et cetera. That's the only bow to modern technology. These organs are still exactly as they were in the 20s. Everything that you hear is exactly as it was. Everything is wind generated. There are no speakers, no amplifiers, no digital, no nothing. It's an acoustic instrument strictly, and the electricity is simply involved between the console and the chambers, telling which pipe to play.
I'm so glad you made that point. I'm so glad you did, because when you think about it, that's a really loud instrument. If you're up in the balcony and there is no amplification, is what you're saying. It's totally the instrument making that sound.
You can blow away any symphony in the world with that pipe organ.
It's awesome. Absolutely. So listen, we are going to continue our conversation right after this break here on WCRN AM 830.
Now, back to more of Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theater. And your host, Lisa Condit.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I am delighted to be here with Don Phipps, our mighty Wurlitzer curator, and we have a very exciting event coming up at the theater on February 8th. It's a Saturday, perfect day of the week. Want to tell people a little bit about this brainchild that you and Nell had and have put together?
Yes, I certainly would. This is going to be the Big Band Era-Wurlitzer Theater Organ Style. And we're featuring at the console of the mighty Wurlitzer Mr. Ken Double, who, besides being a very talented theater organist who sort of specializes in big band arrangements, he is also the president and CEO of the National ATOS, or National American Theater Organ Society. He's going to be accompanied by Skip Stein and Skip's wife, Kathy Clemmy, who were in the middle of the big band era and were featured as trumpet soloist and girl singer with the Harry James Orchestra. So we're going to hear organ solos of big band music. We're going to hear Skip on his trumpet, accompanied by Ken Double and also Skip's wife, who is a wonderful singer. And I'm sure at the end, everybody will be doing their thing at once. So it should be a very exciting time.
Well, you know, our organ events have really been growing in popularity, and I'm so pleased, and I know that you're one of the driving forces behind that. What made you come up with the idea of an event with the big band Wurlitzer style?
Well, actually, this is not an original performance or original program. We've actually, in past years, done this twice. We did it as part of the American Theater Organist Society National Convention. We did it with these three same artists several years ago as a finale to our convention. And then we also presented the same type of program, once again featuring these three artists at the Shanklin Music Hall in Groton, Massachusetts. In both cases, they were very enthusiastically received, so we thought we'd do another show, and really, hopefully, we'll have a lot of people come in and enjoy this particular era in American musical history.
Well, you know what else is really interesting and great about this day? The organ concert starts at 3 o'clock, but as people might know, we have a whole series of Lyceum events. It's our Access Hanover Lyceum series events where we'll have behind the scenes kind of talks or tours with resident or visiting experts. And we have a program this day before the organ concert. Do you want to tell people a little bit about that?
Yes, this again will feature particularly Skip Stein and his wife Kathy, who, as I just mentioned, were featured performers in the Big Band era with the Harry James Orchestra, and they're going to talk about their days on the road as part of the orchestra, some of the nostalgic experiences they went through, and sort of bring us back to this particular glorious day of the Big Band Orchestra.
Well, that sounds really fun. I believe that portion starts at 2 o'clock, correct? So basically, when you go onto our website, which is thehanovertheater.org, and you're looking for this event, it's on February 8th, check out the writing and the description about it, because you're going to be charged for one event, but then you have the opportunity to attend this Access Hanover Lyceum series kind of lecture with the performing visiting artists before the show. That's a really special opportunity. Have you participated in some of these before? I know you've led some of the discussions. And what was some of the audience feedback that you've received?
Well, for those who were fortunate enough to be alive in that era, it puts faces on some of the people that were really an active part of this part of American musical history.
Do you remember listening to the Harry James Orchestra, Don?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I've seen the Harry James Orchestra, as a matter of fact. My parents took me, quite some time ago, obviously. But we had a great time, and it was fabulous. And I'm looking forward to this event at the Hanover Theater. Again, it is Saturday, February 8th. The performance starts at 3 p.m., and we have a lecture beforehand starting at 2 p.m. Very reasonably priced. You know, if you receive our season guide, you'll see in many of our events, we have this little organ icon. They're little pipes. And it's next to every event that has a Wurlitzer pre-show performance. Do you want to tell people a little bit about what those pre-show performances are like?
Well, we call them walk-in music, and we feature Len Beiersdorfer, who's our resident organist here at the Hanover, and also Len was an active participating member of my installation crew. So he's not only contributed his considerable musical talent to playing for the enjoyment of people coming into the theater before the show, but he's actually got his hands dirty in working on the organ during the installation.
What are you personally looking forward to most with this event?
Well, it's been my privilege to hear, of course, these three artists playing together. Skip Stein is an absolutely glorious trumpet player, and Kathy puts a lot of spirit into her singing, and Ken Double is certainly an exceptionally fine organist. And when they all get together doing their thing, it really brings you back to the glorious era of that type of music.
Oh, that's great. So if people are interested in finding out more about how to become more involved with maybe the Organ Society or more information about other organ performances, do you have some resources you'd like to share?
Well, yes. The American Theater Organ Society has a website, and also our local chapter, which is Eastern Mass. We call ourselves EMCATOS, EMCATOS. You can Google both of those organizations, go on our website, and learn sort of what makes this bunch of organ lovers tick.
Thank you so much, Don. If you are interested in learning more about the Big Band Era-Wurlitzer Style event that we're having on February 8th, the performance starts at 3 p.m., then come take a musical journey back in time to the big band era. You will join veteran performers of the Harry James Orchestra, Kathy Kemme and Skip Stein, who will share their insights on this special period in American popular music. You'll enjoy personal recollections, intimate stories, and swing-style melodies, accompanied by the talented Kin Double at the Mighty Wurlitzer. Please make your reservations for both the pre-show presentation that we talked about and the concert for a nostalgic afternoon of musical entertainment. We'll see you at the theater, and stay tuned for more after this break.
Now, back to more of Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theater. And your host, Lisa Condit.
Thanks for listening as we continue our conversation here with Clark Wilson. Clark is one of the best organists in the entire world, and he certainly travels all over, and we are lucky enough to have him returning once again to accompany one of our silent films. It's the last in our series, Steamboat Bill Jr., and that's going to be on Sunday, May 11th.
Right, and it is just one of the most fabulous films. You know, Buster Keaton made, I think, some of the most wonderful comedies of the silent picture era of anyone, and many people consider this definitely one of his best films. All of his gags, all of his physical comedy, everything is in this one. It's a good one.
So I have never seen this movie. Can you fill me in? What's it about?
Well, I don't want to fill you in too
Oh,
much.
come on.
But,
a little bit. Tell our audience.
well, the whole thing, of course, is Buster is the son of a river captain, a scraggy old river captain, and he hasn't seen his father for many years, and so he comes to visit with the father who runs this steamboat. Well, Buster he's what they used to call a dandy. He's all dressed up in his college attire and a nice little scarf and a cute little hat, and the father is aghast. This couldn't possibly be his son. Well, he's going to rough and tough up Buster and get him to be a captain on the riverboat.
Oh, that'll be good.
And Buster trying to run a steamboat and all of the things that go on, it's a riot and a half what happens. But then, of course, he falls in love with the daughter of the rival steamboat owner. And so there's this secondary story that goes on in the whole thing of the love affair, and between all this running around and so on, how does he get the girl? And then there's a tornado descends on the town
of course.
At the tail end of the whole thing. And so you get the last 20 minutes as the chase scene, so to speak, that goes on and on. So it's just one thing after another. And as I say, just about every gag that Keaton ever developed. The famous scene in this one is where he's standing in the street during the storm, and the house front falls on him, but he comes up standing in what's an open window. And it was a real house side that fell on him. It wasn't just a muslin set or something. So it was an extremely dangerous stunt. If he'd been off a few inches this way or that way, he wouldn't have made it through the scene alive. So there are many, many interesting stories about the stars of that period, and particularly Keaton, interested in doing all of his own stunts. It was unheard of for these people to have a stand-in and so on, and being suspended by a cable from a crane and swung all around and over the hills and the river and things during all of these scenes. It's really something. So it's a spectacle as well as a comedy.
Oh my gosh. As you're describing that, I'm listening to you and I can picture the da-da-da and all the different music. And you have the joy of being able to orchestrate that and insert it all. And you plan it all out in advance, right?
Well, exactly. As I've often said in talks on silent film scoring and so on, it's way more than just walking in off the street and winging it to see what happens. I mean, you really do a character study of all of the leads and the different people, the important people in the film, the time period of the film, the locale of the film, all of these different things. And then you go to your library and you pick out the music that you want to use. And because this is a 1920s steamboat era, riverfront type film, you've got a lot of opportunity to use Southern music, things that you would have heard on the Mississippi, the Steamboat Round the Bend type music, Stephen Foster, different things like that. And there's such a tremendous roller coaster of what's going on in this. So you've got all of those, and you've got love themes, and you've got comedy themes, and you've got the tornado music and all of this. So it's a little of everything.
It's so funny because I keep picturing the Wizard of Oz as you're talking about that and the house falling down. And you're right. What year was this movie filmed?
Oh, you would ask me off the top of my head. It's the late 20s. I want to say it was 26. I just don't recall at the moment. But it was 20s technology, and they were pushing it all the time.
I'll say.
Though, you in the 20s, you actually come up with early Technicolor in some of these releases. They were grinding special camera lenses to get certain shots that the artists wanted, and it was people like Keaton and Harold Lloyd and Lon Chaney, people like that were the stars of these pictures that were very, very much pushing to move forward, to get greater and greater effects, and ultimately led to what we have today.
Can you even imagine if one of them was reincarnated and was inserted in today's technology, what they could do with that? Because thinking back to what they had to work with and the effects that they were able to create, I can only imagine what they'd be able to do now.
Well, it's fascinating, of course, to think about in that era where there was no computer generation for anything. They really didn't mix in very much animation. That really hadn't quite come on the scene as strong as what we think of animation, Warner Brothers and things like that.
Yep.
So most of what they were doing was real time. They did it themselves, and they did it with people.
Can you imagine? Now, do we know whether Buster Keaton ever was injured doing any of his own stunts? I can't imagine.
He was, but he didn't know it at the time. But a few years later, on a regular checkup, apparently he was checking in at the doctor, and they said, now, just exactly when did you fracture your spine?
Oh, gosh.
And he said, well, I don't think I ever did. And they said, well, yes, you have. Can
Holy-
you think back? And he thought back, and he said, well, maybe about 3-4 years ago, I remember I did a stunt and didn't quite work out right, and I had a headache for 3 weeks afterward. And they said, well, that would have been it. That would have
Holy
been
cow.
it. So,
What a
and
tough
it's like
character.
Harold Lloyd doing a stunt and blowing off a couple of fingers on one hand, and he wore a prosthetic glove for the rest of his life for pictures and so on, so you wouldn't notice that part of his hand was missing from things that he did for his pictures. It's, as I say, they just wouldn't have considered having somebody else do their stunts. It was
Right.
their picture. That's what they did.
These are tough, tough guys. How long is this movie?
This movie is about 70 to 75 minutes, and that was a typical length for these feature comedies. It's just enough.
And so is this going to be shown straight through, or will there be an intermission?
I think probably what we'll do for this is do a little bit of a first half with some organ solos, let everybody hear that side of the instrument, because it is a different side than how we utilize it for these pictures. And then we'll take an intermission, and then we'll come back and we'll do this picture in the entire second half.
Wow. So what a treat for people. This is such a great, first of all, I believe it's Mother's Day weekend. So what a great family activity for all generations to come, especially as you described that you're going to do some organ soloists and then you're going to have a short intermission and see this whole fabulous film.
Right. And I always like to mention, too, that the neat thing about these films, these comedies from the 20s, they might be 80-some years old, but funny is funny.
Absolutely. And I remember when I was sitting at another one of our events, it was the first time we had shown a black and white silent short. I think it was Laurel and Hardy. And the whole audience was laughing hysterically because it's refreshing. The fact is, it's simple, it's refreshing, and everybody gets the humor.
Right. And it is neat to see a house full of people watching a medium that appeals to everyone from age 5 right up to 105.
Oh, absolutely. So do you have a favorite Buster Keaton movie? I'm just curious.
Well, this is one of them. There
Yep.
are several that, in my book anyway, would tie for first place. This, and there's one called The Cameraman. There's one called Seven Chances, where he advertises for a bride in the newspaper and winds up with about 1,000 of them chasing him to the church and so on. It's the same kind of thing. He's always after the girl, and it's always a tough time, and there's always a great big huge chase of some sort. But there are so many of them, and they're all excellent. I don't think I've ever seen a Keaton that wasn't really good.
So in all of your research, because you've already explained you already have to do a lot of research to come up with a great score for these movies, anything that strikes you about the music from this era?
Well, the music from the teens and the 20s, it's a tuneful type of music. Everything has melody and rhythm and harmony to it, which used to be how we described music.
I know.
And all of this sort of music that comes out of that era is the type of stuff that I like to utilize in these films. It's what you would have heard the first time around. I think the music fits the era fits the pictures, etc., etc. So I'm trying in these scores to create an entire experience as you would have experienced it in the movie palace in the 20s. I try not to utilize rhythms and riffs and musical progressions that didn't come on the scene until 1962 or whatever, so we don't
Right.
distract from the film.
You're authentic. I love that.
We try.
So anything you can recommend if people want to find out more information about you?
Well, if they want to find out more about me, I do have a website. It's clarkwilson.net, and it lists numerous of the things that I've done. There are some fun pictures on there and stories about when I've played for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and so on. Some fun things like that.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to check it out. I recommend all of you do as well. And if you are interested in this show at the Hanover Theater, visit thehanovertheater.org. We will see you all at the theater. And thanks again for joining us. Have a great day, Clark.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theater with your host, Lisa Condit. Make sure to join us again next Sunday morning here on AM 830 WCRN.